Two Jewish brothers vanished after school in a quiet New England town in 2007. No witnesses, no bodies, just a mother who refused to stop searching. 11 years later, divers uncover a sunken boat beneath Birch Hollow Pond. Inside, a backpack, rope marks, and a note in a child's handwriting. What happened to Noam remains a mystery. No one was prepared to face. The last Thursday of May 2007 came with an odd, weightless stillness in Ashbridge. The kind of afternoon where everything hangs suspended, like the air's holding its breath. Leah Stein adjusted the strap of her work bag as she stood by the front porch, pulling up 2 houses down. Her 2 sons, Noam and Ezra, would not be on that bus today. That much she remembered clearly. They had chosen to stay after school for extra study hours at the Beth El Eliminates Recovery. Noam had a history essay to finish. Ezra, who worshipped his older brother, had insisted on waiting with him. "I'll do my reading packet, Mommy. Please let me stay," he'd said, his kippah tilted and his voice all confidence. She had smiled, kissed both their foreheads, and watched them disappear into the morning fog. It wasn't unusual. The boys were responsible, studious. Noam was 11 going on 25, meticulous with his backpack and planner. Ezra, 9, curious and bright-eyed, lived in Noam's shadow like a second moon. They had grown up knowing the expectations of their Orthodox upbringing, disciplined, diligent, respectful. The kind of boys you didn't worry about, not in a town like Ashbridge, not until that day. At 3:40 p.m., Leah realized she hadn't received her usual call from Noam saying they were walking home. She checked her phone again, then walked to the end of the driveway, scanning the sidewalk. Nothing. The streets hummed the low murmur of spring. She called the school. A woman from the front desk answered and confirmed that the boys had signed in to the after-school study hall at the library. "Should have left by now," the woman said, hesitating. "Let me check with the librarian." But there was no follow-up call. Leah dialed again 5 minutes later, then 10. By 4:10 she was driving, heartbeat hammering beneath her ribs. When she arrived, the school building felt like an empty shell. Mr. Benton, the English teacher, said he'd last seen the boys around 2:30, hunched over their books. The library aide, Mrs. Keller, had apparently stepped out early for a dentist appointment. No one had noticed them leave. No one remembered hearing the front door chime. The security guard wasn't at his usual post. He had left at 3 for an appointment with his parole officer. Leah demanded the security footage, eyes scanning the front hallway cameras. The assistant principal, uncomfortable but compliant, brought up the files. They watched the hallway monitor from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., glitchy, pixelated, then black for exactly 93 minutes. A small red icon flashed. Video error. Playback unavailable. Leah's face stiffened. "Why is it blank?" she asked. The assistant principal clicked around, confused. "Maintenance log says the DVR backup drive was being replaced this morning. It's probably a wiring issue." "But who logged that?" Says technician override signed off by IT manager M. Lowell. But when they checked, Mr. Lowell had been out sick for 3 days. That's when the first flicker of panic bloomed in Leah's chest, hot and unwelcome. At 5:02 p.m., police were called. Officer Raymond Mendoza, a young patrolman with the Ashbridge PD, arrived and took the first report. "Do they ever wander off? Visit a friend?" he asked gently. "No," Leah said, shaking her head. "They come straight home every day. We have Shabbat prep every Thursday." "Would they have any reason to run away?" She stared at him. "They're 11 and 9. They brought matzah sandwiches this morning, and they're Torah readers." He nodded, scribbling notes. "We'll start a perimeter check." By nightfall, the perimeter had widened to include the neighborhood, the trail by the woods, and Birch Hollow Pond. Leah sat on the curb with her husband Ari beside her, his hands trembling despite his composure. He was a dentist, a man who rarely raised his voice, who lived by order and clarity. Now he sat hollow, unable to speak. By midnight, the school was wrapped in yellow tape. Dogs had arrived from the county. Volunteers from the synagogue offered to help. Someone passed around flyers already printed at the corner store, grainy school photos of Noam and Ezra smiling side by side. And all the while the same questions looped. Where could they have gone? Who saw them last? Why was the camera off? Why didn't anyone notice? Why today? Leah replayed the morning in her head. Noam had said something strange. while tying his shoes. "I don't think Mrs. Keller likes me," he had mumbled. She had waved it off. "You don't need everyone to like you, sweetheart. Just be kind." But now she wondered about all the small things she had dismissed. The extra minutes, the forgotten lunchbox, Ezra's sudden nosebleed 2 nights ago, the way he flinched when the kitchen drawer slammed shut. By sunrise, nothing had been found. No backpacks, no clothing, no witnesses. Nothing. Only 2 empty desks in classroom 3B, their pencils still neatly sharpened. The first morning after the disappearance, the school opened under the weight of silence. The flag outside BF Elementary hung limp, the bell rang without enthusiasm, and students shuffled into their classes like sleepwalkers. The Stein boys' desks remained untouched, their books neatly stacked, as if frozen in time. Teachers whispered in the hallways. Security patrolled with exaggerated care. Police had already begun interviewing students, hoping someone had seen something. In the cafeteria, whispers hissed through the air like steam. One student, a small boy named Aaron Bloom, sat stiffly at the end of his lunch table, pushing peas around his tray, eyes darting between the exits. That afternoon, his mother picked him up early and walked him home in silence. At dinner, he asked if Noam and Ezra were going to be in school tomorrow. His mother looked away. 3 days passed. Then Aaron cracked. On the 4th night, during bedtime prayers, he told his father what he had seen. "I saw them go toward the woods, toward the pond," he whispered, clutching the edge of his blanket. Ezra dropped his yarmulke and picked it up. Then they laughed and ran behind the fence. His father froze. "Why didn't you say anything?" Aaron's lip trembled. "You told me not to make up stories." His father stood in the hallway for 10 minutes before calling the Ashbridge PD. The next morning, Officer Mendoza returned to Bethel. Aaron was interviewed with the child psychologist present. His account was calm, consistent, and oddly specific. He had seen the Stein brothers exiting the side door near the gymnasium, laughing, with Noam pointing toward the tree line. It was just before 3 p.m., and no one else was in the yard. He remembered hearing a bird call and noticing the boys disappearing past the hedges near the south fence, exactly the route that led to the Birch Hollow Pond trail. The police took the account seriously. A new search perimeter was drawn. At 2 p.m., search dogs were brought back. The canines, trained in scent tracking, were given items of clothing from the Stein household, a shirt of Ezra's, and a prayer book with Noam's name inside. The dogs sniffed and began moving with urgency through the grass. Their handlers followed closely, radioing updates every 20 yards. When they reached the fence behind the gym, the dogs hesitated only briefly before continuing into the narrow wooded path. Aaron's crouching head swiveled. The ground was uneven, scattered with pine needles and last autumn's wet leaves. A few broken branches marked where someone, likely a child, had recently stepped. The trail led them nearly 400 meters southeast, down hills toward the pond. The dogs pressed on, tails high, noses close to the ground. But then, at the edge of the embankment, something shifted. The dogs slowed, began to circle, then sat. No barking, no digging, no continued tracking. Just stillness. The handlers looked puzzled. "They're confused," one of them said into the radio. "They've lost the trail." The officers scanned the area. The pond glistened in the spring sunlight, undisturbed, bordered by reeds and a narrow dock that hadn't been used in years. No shoe prints, no backpacks, no torn clothing. The only thing they found was a crushed granola wrapper in the weeds, brand generic, untraceable. By nightfall, divers were brought in. The water was cold, dark, with visibility reduced to less than 3 feet. The first dive came up empty, the second, too. No jackets, no lunchboxes, no broken glasses. The divers reported loose sediment and slippery rocks, but nothing resembling evidence. A specialist from the State Wildlife Department reviewed the topography. "There's a current running east," he said, pointing to a map. "If they fell in, anything not weighted down would have drifted toward the cattails." But there's no disturbance in the silt layers, no sliding marks, no footpath into the water. "It's like nobody touched it." Leah Stein stood by the pond, arms wrapped tight around her chest, unable to speak. She had prayed for a sign, something, anything. But nature offered only silence. Behind her, officers combed through the tree line with thermal scopes and high beams. Ezra's favorite storybook was in her purse. She had brought it just in case. It still smelled like his room. The rabbi from Temple Bethel arrived at dusk and said a quiet prayer for protection. Ezra's favorite storybook was in her purse, face pale. He hadn't spoken since the dogs stopped. The search extended to cabins and summer homes near the lake, some vacant since the fall. Officers knocked on doors, swept porches, peeked under crawl spaces. A ranger mentioned an old fishing shack somewhere north of the trailhead, but it hadn't been used in decades. "We'll check it," Mendoza said. The local news reported on the effort with muted optimism. Police believe the brothers may have ventured toward a wooded trail near the school, one anchor announced. Authorities stress that no evidence of foul play has been discovered and the investigation remains open. But behind closed doors, the questions deepened. Why did the dogs stop tracking? Why no footprints by the water's edge? Why did Aaron hesitate for days? And what did he mean when he said Noam had pointed at the trees like he already knew the way? By midnight, the search team returned to the station to regroup. Leah and Ari drove home in silence, their porch light left on like a beacon. A pair of muddy boots were left on the mat from the night Ezra played soccer in the rain. She didn't move them. She didn't want to. That night, Leah sat in Ezra's room, rocking back and forth, humming a lullaby from when he was 2. She didn't cry. Not yet. Crying meant it might be true. Somewhere beyond the reach of lamplight and logic, in the space between what Aaron saw and what nature refused to show, something had gone terribly wrong. As the days stretched into a week, Ashbridge began to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. The morning prayers at Temple Bethel became more urgent, more desperate. The Stein family, surrounded by casseroles and condolences, sat mostly in silence. Leah rarely left Ezra's room, while Era checked the porch light 3 times each night. Flyers with Noam and Ezra's faces fluttered on lampposts, in coffee shops, on the corkboard, outside the post office. But none of it brought answers. Inside Beach Alemany, the administration struggled to maintain composure. Hallways that once echoed with backpack-slapping tile now felt hollow. In the staff lounge, whispers turned into accusations. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a school administrator named Ellen Grossman pulled Officer Mendoza aside. She was shaking, her fingers tight around a cup of untouched tea. "There's something you should know," she said. "About Mrs. Keller." Mendoza raised an eyebrow. "Rhonda Keller, the assistant in the library?" Ellen nodded. "She's not new. She worked here before, from 2001 to 2004. Then she disappeared for a while. The record says leave of absence, but that's not true." "What happened?" "There was a boy," Ellen whispered. "He was 5, kindergarten class. Wandered off during dismissal. Found near the woods. No one knew how he got out. Turned out she'd been watching 2 classes at once. She didn't see him leave. The district suspended her." 6 months? "Was this reported?" Mendoza asked. "No, it was buried. The principal at the time wanted it quiet, said it was avoidable and nothing serious. The parents were paid off. She came back in 2006 under a part-time contract. No one outside admin was supposed to know." Mendoza scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Do you have any records?" Helen hesitated. "They're sealed, but I made a copy of the original report. I kept it, just in case." That night, Mendoza reviewed the file. It was short, clinical, and chilling. Incident report dated March 22, 2004. Child found alone on Ashbridge Forest Trail. School supervision noted inadequate. Responsible staff Rhonda Keller. A reprimand was issued. A temporary suspension enforced. But no official record was ever filed with the state board. The paper trail ended in a locked drawer. He called Keller's listed number, disconnected. He checked her address, vacant. She hadn't returned to her home since the day of the boys' disappearances. Her landlord said she'd left a note claiming she needed to clear her head and would be gone for a while. That while had stretched into 8 days. The search widened. Investigators knocked on neighbors' doors again, this time with more pointed questions. That's when they found Mr. Malcolm Price, a 72-year-old retired mechanic who lived in a single-story house overlooking the back edge of Birch Hollow Pond. He had lived there for over 30 years and rarely missed a sunrise walk. On the morning of May 24th, he told Officer Mendoza he'd seen something odd the day the boys vanished. "Never seen it before?" "Did you see anyone inside?" Mendoza asked. "Just a shadow in the driver's seat. Couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Sat there for over an hour, then just pulled away. Real quiet. No hurry. What time? A little after 3, I'd say, maybe closer to 3:30. I had just come back from the store. Why didn't you say anything earlier? Mr. Price looked away. Didn't want trouble, didn't think it meant anything at the time, and truthfully, I don't trust cops much. Mendoza noted the make and model as best he could. The problem was, no one in the registry had reported a matching vehicle. No security camera caught it. No traffic cam, it was a ghost. When Mr. Price was contacted again 3 days later for follow-up, his story had changed. Could have been a trick of light, he muttered. Might have been an old pickup. I didn't see much, really. He refused to sign a statement. He refused to speak further. Back at the station, Mendoza slammed his file drawer shut. Every thread unraveled, every lead turned to dust. Her article, still unpublished, revealed that Rhonda had also worked briefly at a charter school in Manchester and left suddenly there too. Another incident, another hush. The pattern felt deliberate. Nora had felt her stomach turn. She was alone with my sons, she whispered. Alone, and no one knew. Mendoza asked the IT department to reanalyze the corrupted security footage. After multiple attempts, they recovered 3 usable frames from 2:48 p.m. to 2:52 p.m. Grainy, low light, but visible. Frame 1, Ezra adjusting his backpack back. Frame 2, Noam at the hallway exit. Frame 3, a blurry silhouette in the library entrance. Slight build, hair pulled back, possibly female, possibly Rhonda Keller. That was the last visual record of the boys alive. No footage from outside. No footage from the side path to the pond. No witnesses. Only an administrator with a hidden file and an old man who changed his story. Leah began to sleep less and less. She paced the living room, checked the door lock 4 times an hour, and refused to let her daughter walk to the mailbox alone. The town changed too. Families whispered over pews, sighed each other in grocery aisles, kept their children close. The synagogue increased its security. Teachers walked students to every doorway, and still there were no bodies, no confessions, no trace. The silence after Keller's name surfaced was heavier than anything before. Noam and Ezra's absence had become a wound the town couldn't cauterize. At Temple Bethel, the rabbi added the boys' names to the daily prayer for the missing. Leah and Ari drifted like ghosts in their own home, the couch cushions still dented from where the boys had last sat watching cartoons. Despite the leads that fizzled, the town tried to move forward. But then, 10 days after the disappearance, something seemingly minor broke the haze. It started with an errand. A local patrol officer, Rosalind Keats, was assigned to follow up on shop owners near the school, hoping to uncover overlooked details. She stepped into Abrams General, the tiny corner store just 2 blocks from Bethel Elementary, a place known for its dusty shelves and Mr. Abrams' extraordinary memory. At first, the old man shook his head. "I don't think I saw either of them," he said. "The little ones never come here alone." Rosalind nodded, ready to leave, when he paused. Wait. That day, that afternoon, a man came in, around 3:15 maybe? Something about him felt off. She raised an eyebrow. "Can you describe him?" "Middle-aged, maybe mid-40s, Caucasian, dark hair but thinning, wearing a long black coat, the kind you don't wear in spring unless you're hiding something." "What did he buy?" 2 bottles of water, Poland Spring, and a pack of fruit snacks, the kids' kind, dinosaur shape. He paid cash, didn't speak, just nodded. Rosalind felt her pulse quicken. "Did you see where he went?" "No," Mr. Abram admitted. "He just stepped out and walked up Maple Street, toward the woods. Didn't buy anything else. Didn't look at the register, just stared at me like I was furniture." Rosalind checked his security feed. The system, old and barely functional, only retained the last 7 days. The footage had already looped over, but Abrams was known in town for remembering license plates from cars that idled too long, for knowing which student liked which candy. His testimony mattered. She added it to the file. At the precinct, Mendoza reviewed it with narrowed eyes. "This doesn't prove he was with the boys," he said, "but that snack's a match. Ezra loved those. Leah said she stopped buying them because he was eating them before dinner." Listening from the hallway, flinched. What if it wasn't a random man, he asked. What if someone knew what they liked? The theory was too chilling to dismiss. That night, Leah tried to distract herself by cleaning. It was the kind of distraction that never soothed. She found herself in the basement, sorting boxes of old blankets, half-finished puzzles, and things the boys had outgrown. The basement was cold and smelled of mildew, as basements often do. The light flickered once before settling. She opened a bin labeled Winter and pulled out scarves and mittens. Tucked beneath a striped hat was something small and familiar. A kippa, navy blue with white thread along the rim. She recognized it instantly. Noah's favorite. She had embroidered the Hebrew letters herself. Her breath caught. It was damp, cold to the touch. She raised it to her nose and flinched. It smelled like earth, like wet wood, like the kind of dirt that clung to pond banks. Bile rose in her throat. She called Ari down. He took one look and turned pale. "Why is it here?" she asked. "He wore it that morning. I packed it in his bag." "We would have seen it," Ari said. "We cleaned down here after Passover. It wasn't here." Leah stared at the shelves. No footprints, no disturbed dust, but the kippa was here, not buried, placed, like an offering. She called Mendoza. He arrived within 20 minutes. The object was bagged and sent for testing. Preliminary analysis confirmed the presence of organic sediment consistent with wet environments, possibly pond silt. No fingerprints, no hair, just fibers and moisture and silence. Leah felt violated. Whoever had done this had been in her house, had touched her child's things, had known where to leave something she would find. It didn't make sense. Ari changed the locks the next morning. Dina, Leah's sister, offered to stay over. The children's rooms were now kept closed, the air inside stale from being untouched. On the third floor, the attic light turned on by itself. Ari blamed faulty wiring. Leah wasn't so sure. That Friday, during Shabbat dinner, Leah left a seat for Noam and Ezra. No one spoke during the blessing over the wine. The house hummed with dread. In the back of her mind, she kept replaying the image. Noam's kippa, damp, returned like a relic. Who had touched it? Who had taken it off his head? And why, after so many days, had it come back? The discovery of Noam's kippa should have reignited the investigation, but instead it seemed to trigger a quiet retreat. 2 days after the basement incident, Officer Mendoza was pulled into a meeting at the Ashbridge Police Department's administrative office. Inside were the chief of police, a representative from the mayor's office, and 2 council members, faces tight with practiced concern. "We need resolution," said Councilman Lyle Hargrave, voice measured. "The community is on edge. Parents are threatening to pull their kids out of school. Temple Bethel is hiring private security. You understand the optics?" "We don't have bodies," Mendoza said plainly. "We don't have a confirmed crime scene. What we have are rumors. One untraceable man in a coat and a hat found after 10 days. "And what about the lake?" asked Hargrave. "You searched it, found nothing." "Right so far," Mendoza said, "but there's more work to be done." The mayor's aide cleared her throat. "It's election season, Raymond. We can't keep this open-ended forever. If it was an accident, say so. Let people grieve. Let them move on." By the end of the day, a press release was drafted and quietly circulated. It read, "In light of recent findings and after thorough search efforts, the disappearance of Noam and Ezra Stein is currently being classified as a probable accidental drowning. Authorities believe the children may have ventured too close to the water's edge and fallen in. No foul play is suspected at this time." Mendoza signed the release with shaking hands. The words felt like betrayal, but the pressure was immense. The phone calls constant, and his desk piled high with reminders that the department's budget was on the line. Leah and Ari received the notice via email, not even a phone call. Leah printed it out, read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. Ari stared out the kitchen window for 2 hours that night, eyes unblinking. "There's no mud on their shoes," Leah whispered. "Not one footprint, not one thread, and now we're supposed to just accept that they fell in and disappeared like stones?" Mendoza wanted to push back, but he had already been reprimanded for requesting additional sonar scans without departmental approval. One of those scans, conducted independently by a retired Navy diver named Craig Vanister, had shown something. A sonar anomaly, a large rectangular object lying on the bottom of Birch Hollow Pond, about 35 feet from the northern embankment. Bannister had reached out after seeing the missing persons flyers. He volunteered his time, brought his own equipment, and filed a short report. "Sonar return indicates a possible submerged structure or debris cluster," he wrote. "Unnatural angles, possible metallic echo, worth further investigation." Mendoza submitted the report as an addendum to the case file. 3 hours later, it was removed. When he checked the file again the next morning, there was no mention of Bannister, no social imagery, no coordinates. Just a sticky note from the records clerk: "Chief says source is unverified. Disregard." When Mendoza confronted the clerk, she shrugged. He said Bannister's not affiliated with any state agency, no license on file, probably looking for attention. But Mendoza remembered the readings. He remembered Bannister's eyes, serious, focused, not a man chasing headlines. He called Bannister's number again, no answer. Left a message. Nothing. Leah heard about the sonar reading from Nora Bishop, the journalist. Nora had obtained a draft of the original report before it was scrubbed. She showed it to Leah in the synagogue parking lot under a street lamp. "This was buried," she said, "and I can't get anyone to confirm it exists." Leah read the description twice, then 3 times, then turned away and vomited in the grass. She had dreamed of water every night for the past week. Now she knew why. Meanwhile, the town began to shift tone. Sympathy turned into fatigue. Posters of the boys started coming down. Families canceled playdates. A rumor spread that the Steins were holding on to something that wasn't there, that maybe the boys had been troubled, maybe they had run, maybe the parents knew more than they let on. The councilman spoke about healing and closure. A local pastor held a vigil, careful not to mention the boys by name. Ours stopped going to work. Leah stopped eating. The only light came from the packages still arriving: meals, candles, prayers. But nothing from the police. Nothing real. That week, Leah called the chief herself. She asked why Bannister's Sun-So reading had been dismissed. He told her politely, calmly, that Bannister was a well-meaning civilian and not a reliable source. When she asked about retrieving the object from the lake, he said there was no confirmed object. "So you're not going to check it?" she asked. "We have no legal cause," he said, "and no state mandate to explore unconfirmed sonar noise from unsanctioned equipment." "My sons are dead or missing," she said. "Isn't that cause enough?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Stein," he said. "We've done everything we can." Leah hung up. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat in the kitchen with the lights off and listened to the wind against the window. Mendoza came by the next day without his badge, just a man in a coat holding a coffee he didn't drink. "I believe you," he said, "but they won't let me go any further." Leah nodded. "Then we'll go without them." 5 years passed like a long breath held underwater. The Stein family, fractured but standing, learned to exist in the shadows of empty rooms. Leah kept the boys' bedroom exactly as it had been, beds made, toys untouched, the curtains still tied with Ezra's favorite ribbon. Ari returned to dentistry, hollow and silent, while Dina moved in to help with meals, mail, and mourning that never announced itself. The town of Ashbridge changed too. New families moved in, old ones left. Birch Hollow Pond remained closed off for swimming due to erosion and was rarely spoken of. The official version of events became gospel: 2 boys, a tragic accident, nothing more. The sonar report was forgotten, the man in the black coat erased. And yet not everything stayed buried. On a Tuesday morning in late October, a package arrived on the Steins' porch. There was no return address, no postmark, just a small brown box wrapped with plain string placed precisely in the center of the welcome mat. Dina found it while retrieving the morning paper. She assumed it was a delivery until she saw the box was hand-tied and too light. Inside were 2 child socks, blue with tiny white stripes, clean, folded, with a faint scent of lavender and something metallic. Pinned to one sock was a tag, faded but legible. "Easy to see," Max replied. Together they stared at the socks like they were explosives. Ari arrived 10 minutes later. He touched them once, gently, and said nothing for a long time. Leah's voice was hoarse. "Where did they come from?" Ari's answer was hollow. "From someone who hasn't forgotten?" The socks were sent to the state lab. No DNA, no fingerprints, no hair, just the tag, and the impossible timestamp. The thread used to sew the name label matched a discontinued model from a local tailor shop that had closed in 2008. It was Ezra's, beyond doubt. But where had it been for 5 years? And why return it now? Mendoza, long retired from Ashbridge PD, visited the house when he heard. He looked older, grayer, but his voice still carried quiet urgency. "They're playing with you," he said. "Someone's trying to remind you it never ended." He handed Leah a printed blog post written by someone named Jordan Ames, who ran a site tracking unresolved child disappearances. The title read, "When Towns Forget, Birch Hollow's Pattern of Silence." In the post, Jordan outlined 2 other missing persons cases from towns bordering the Birch Hollow woods. The first was a boy named Benjamin Cross, 8 years old, who vanished during a family picnic near Greenwood Preserve in 2003. His shoes were found weeks later by the water, but no further trace. The second case was a girl, Miriam Feldman, age 6, who disappeared from her backyard in Bellwater, just 6 miles north of Ashbridge, in 2009. A neighbor had seen a car idling by the fence that day, but it was never identified. Both cases were ruled accidental, wandered off, lost in the woods, no foul play suspected. But Jordan had compiled maps, timelines, and behavioral parallels. He proposed that all 3 cases, Benjamin, Miriam, and the Stein boys, formed a triangle around Birch Hollow Pond, all within walking distance of old access roads and defunct ranger trails. Leah read the blog post 6 times. Ari sat beside her without speaking. Finally, she whispered, "How many more were there?" Jordan had also interviewed residents. One woman, now in her 70s, mentioned that as a teenager in the 60s, she'd heard rumors about a place in the woods that children were told not to go. She thought it was just a myth. Jordan didn't. His post ended with a chilling line. "Sometimes the lie isn't that they're gone, it's that they were ever searched for." Leah emailed Jordan that night. He responded within 2 hours, polite but cautious. He said he'd been threatened before, told to stop digging, called a conspiracy theorist, but he sent her a PDF of his notes, redacted names and locations. "Your boys weren't the first," he wrote, "and if I'm right, someone's making sure they won't be the last." Leah shared it with Mendoza, who now worked part-time for a private firm. He forwarded it to a friend at the FBI, but received no reply. Jordan's files included aerial maps of Birch Hollow, notes about unregistered structures near the pond, and a list of old property transfers from 1999 to 2006, some under shell corporations. One tract of land near the North Bank had changed hands 3 times in 5 years and was now listed as abandoned. Eric began researching real estate records, staying up late with municipal archives. Leah reread Ezra's Torah portion from that year, her fingers tracing the Hebrew letters like prayers. Dina cleaned the living room obsessively, as if sweeping could ward off the past. Meanwhile, the socks remained in evidence lockup, but their memory, their weight, lived on the mantel like a relic. When neighbors asked, Leah told them it was a hoax, that it didn't mean anything. But at night, she whispered Ezra's name into the hallway and waited for the echo. Because deep down, she knew someone was still out there, someone who hadn't let go. It began with a YouTube video. A local dive enthusiast named Carter West had started documenting underwater urban legends in New England, half documentary, half treasure hunt. His cousin, a college student home for the summer, suggested the story of the Stein brothers. Carter had never heard of them, but after 2 nights of reading forums and news clippings, he was hooked. By the 3rd week of June, he and his team, 2 friends from the Ashbridge Community College Dive Club, decided to scan Birch Hollow Pond. They used a side-scan sonar device borrowed from the school, mounted to the side of Carter's aluminum boat. It was supposed to be a weekend stunt for views, a curious dive with dramatic music and pixelated graphics. It turned into something else. The first scan produced nothing unusual. The second scan, focused on the pond's northwestern pocket near a cluster of overgrown reeds, returned a jagged, angular shape resting about 20 feet below the surface. Carter marked the GPS. On Sunday morning, under a gray sky, they dropped a dive line. Visibility underwater was poor, silty, and thick with algae. At 15 feet, the outlines blurred. At 20, the shape became more defined. Carter surfaced with a strained expression. "There's something down there," he said. "Wooden frame, rectangular. Feels like an old boat, maybe even a cabin skiff. Rotted but intact." They filmed their findings, uploaded the teaser clip, and by evening the footage had reached over 50,000 views. The tags included Stein Brothers, Manoa Valley, Birch Hollow, and abandoned vessel. Mendoza saw the video 3 hours after it went live. She called Leah. She had already seen it. Her voice shook. "They erased it. But it's still there." Carter contacted the State Dive Rescue Unit the next morning. They were skeptical but agreed to an official inspection. On Wednesday, a team of professionals descended with industrial lighting and a drone camera. They confirmed it was indeed a skiff, 12 feet long, flat-bottomed, partially buried in the silt. It had no motor, no registration number, just a frame, a warped bench seat, and floorboards littered with organic debris. What they found next turned the story. On the port side of the boat, beneath a layer of algae and mud, lay a small backpack, navy blue, worn straps. A cracked zipper affixed to the front was a patch, stitched, frayed, reading Bethel Elementary. Inside the backpack were 2 crushed pencils, 1 sheet of multiplication problems with smudged answers, and a bookmark with the name Noam handwritten in capital letters. Leah dropped to her knees when they showed her the photograph. The backpack had been Ezra's, but Noam had borrowed it that week because his own had a broken buckle. She remembered scolding him gently for not telling her sooner. The search crew retrieved the boat using float bags and hoists, dragging it to shore under tight supervision. Forensics teams from the state arrived the next morning. Photographs were taken, measurements logged, samples collected. On the wooden slats of the boat's floor, faint impressions emerged, parallel lines, symmetrical, as if a rope had once been pulled tight against the grain. Rope burn, consistent with bindings. On the inner side of the bench seat, a single nail protruded at a sharp angle, stained with something dark and brittle. Not blood, too old, possibly something else. But the pattern of wear, the scuff marks, the torn edge of canvas caught beneath the seat, it all told a story no one wanted to say aloud. "This wasn't just abandoned petrol," muttered Dag said. "It was used." News of the discovery broke within hours. The press flooded in, reprinting old headlines alongside the new ones. "Camp pack found in sunken boat," they wrote. "New hope or new horror?" Leah refused interviews. Ari stayed silent, but Dina, tired, angry, spoke on record. "Someone knew," she said. "Someone knew this was down there, and they let the story die. That's not accident. That's cover-up." Mendoza demanded to rejoin the investigation, but the department declined. Instead, he started piecing together his own timeline. The backpack placed the boys inside the boat. The rope marks suggested restraint. The question now was simple. Where had the boat been before it sank, and who had access to it? The Records Department unearthed property deeds from around Birch Hollow, 1 tract of land, 3.7 acres of unregistered shoreline just north of the pond, was found to have an access ramp, a decaying dock, and no listed owner since 2002. The boat, it seemed, had a home. Carter West's footage was re-examined. In one frame, as the sonar passes the boat, a second anomaly appears nearby, smaller, denser, possibly metal. Carter hadn't noticed it, but Leah did. She paused the video, heart racing. "What's that?" she asked. "Right there, near the bow, it looks like a box." Mendoza forwarded the frame to the dive unit. They scheduled a secondary sweep. Meanwhile, Jordan Ames, the blogger, published a new post. "The boat nobody wanted to find," it read. He traced similar disappearances to bodies of water across state lines. Not identical, but close. Always near neglected structures. Always with a history of silence. Leah printed the article, highlighted lines. Then she returned to the photo of the boat, staring at the backpack, the torn zipper, the ghost of Noam's handwriting. She touched the screen with her fingers, closed her eyes, and tried to remember the last time he'd smiled. The day after the boat was pulled from the lake, forensic teams began combing through every inch of its warped, algae-streaked frame under a tented enclosure behind the Ashbridge Municipal Lot. The backpack had already confirmed a connection to Noam and Ezra, but what investigators uncovered next deepened the mystery in ways no one expected. Hidden beneath the floorboards, wedged between a cracked slat and a central beam, was a thin, water-damaged notebook, its corners curled, its cover faded but intact. In black letters across the front, written in pencil smudged by time and moisture, it read, Noam. The first few pages contained multiplication tables, science notes, and a half-finished short story titled The Man in the Woods. Leah was brought in to identify the handwriting. Her breath caught when she recognized the sharp angle of her son's teeth, the heavy pressure on the M's, the uneven margins that always drove his teachers crazy. She whispered, "It's his, all of it." But further in the notebook, behind the school pages, lay something else entirely. A diary. Not a formal one, just a few pages, scribbled entries, dated but not always in order. The ink had run in places, but most of the text was legible. The earliest entry read, "We stayed in the boat last night. Ezra's cold. I think they're coming back. I don't like the dark." Another entry. "It's day 2, I think. I hear footsteps sometimes, but no one talks. I gave Ezra the last snack. I told him Mom was going to find us." Then, chillingly, "He doesn't talk much anymore. He sleeps a lot. I think he's scared of the man with the bag." The final entry in the sequence ended mid-sentence. "Ezra didn't open his eyes this morning. I think he's—" And then it stopped. The page was torn, cleanly, not ripped in fear, but removed deliberately. That missing page would haunt Leah more than anything else. Alongside the notebook, tucked in a small waterproof pouch taped under the port bench, was a baby tooth, a molar, yellow deliverance preserved in a paper towel with faint smudges of dried blood. Forensic pathologists extracted it and ran comparative DNA. 2 weeks later, the results came back. It matched Ezra Stein. A second sample, a sliver of bone resembling a cranial fragment, was also tested. It too belonged to Ezra. No other remains were found in or around the boat. No trace of Noam, no blood, no fibers, no skin cells, just his handwriting and his words, etched into damp pages like a message from underwater. The announcement came at a press conference held at Town Hall. The medical examiner read the findings in a monotone voice, never looking at the family seated in the front row. Partial human remains discovered within the submerged vessel recovered from Birch Hollow Pond have been positively identified through DNA analysis as belonging to Ezra Stein, age 9, who was reported missing on May 23, 2007. No remains of his brother Noam Stein have been recovered at this time. Investigation remains ongoing. Reporters asked what everyone was thinking. If Ezra was found, why not Noam? Could he still be alive? The room erupted in flashes. Leah did not speak. Ari stood behind her, hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. Dina stared straight ahead, her mouth trembling. That night, Leah sat in the boys' room with the notebook resting on her lap. She read the entries again and again, the way Noam had tried to be brave, the way he'd cared for his brother. The way Noam had tried to be brave, the way he'd cared for his brother, the way Noam had tried to be brave, the way more panicked. She stared at the final sentence. Ezra didn't open his eyes this morning. Her mind screamed the next word, dead. But Noam hadn't written it. He had stopped himself. Or someone else had. Ari began making calls to private investigators, ex-FBI profilers, anyone who would take them seriously. Mendoza arranged for ground-penetrating radar to scan the forest north of the lake. Meanwhile, Jordan Ames published another entry. This one included a side-by-side timeline of the Stein case and the disappearance of Benjamin Cross, the boy from Greenwood Preserve. Both had boats involved. Both included faint suggestions of someone watching. Someone returning. Jordan speculated that Ezra might have died early and that Noam had survived longer. Possibly even left the boat. But then where was he? The inside of the vessel told a quiet story of waiting, of hunger, of fear, of nights spent with nothing but shallow hope. And yet, no signs of struggle. No broken planks, no smashed boards, just that one protruding nail, that one missing page, that one lost child. For Leah, the pain of discovering Ezra's fate was eclipsed only by the new questions. Was Noam taken? Did he run? Did someone silence his last words to erase a truth too dangerous to leave behind? She began dreaming in fragments, wood creaking, water lapping, the smell of Ezra's shampoo, and always the sound of a pencil scratching paper. then stopping midway. Each morning she woke with the notebook still open on her chest, her fingers pressed to the torn edge like she might will it to reappear. Because deep down she knew whatever came next was waiting beyond that final, missing sentence. The weeks following the identification of Ezra's remains were a blur of silent vigils and private grief. Leah stopped attending community events. Eric kept working late at the clinic. Dina made brisket the way Ezra liked it, but no one touched a bite. The house felt suspended, like time had paused between a beginning and an ending no one wanted to name. Then, late one September afternoon, a letter arrived, not to the Steins, but to Mendoza, still quietly involved, still unwilling to let it rest. It came through the mail slot at his home office, no return address, the envelope thick and yellowed. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper and a death certificate. The certificate belonged to one Sylvia Gold, age 79, who had died of metastatic breast cancer just 2 weeks prior, in a nursing facility on the edge of Ashbridge. The letter was in cursive, shaky but legible. It began with, "To whom it may concern," but the words that followed changed everything. "I was there that day," it read. May 23, 2007. "I worked in the library that afternoon. I saw Rhonda Keller take the boys outside." Mendoza read the sentence again and again, each time slower. Sylvia explained she had been organizing returned books near the window when she noticed Rhonda holding Ezra by the hand, Noam following close behind. She wrote that Rhonda looked nervous, glancing around, leading them not toward the main exit but through the side maintenance door, normally locked. Nervously used. Sylvia thought it odd but not alarming. "I didn't stop her," the letter said. "I didn't report it. She was my superior, and the last time I questioned protocol, I was nearly fired. I needed the job. My husband had passed. I kept quiet. But I think about those boys every day." The letter ended with a simple line. "I'm sorry." Mendoza drove straight to the Stein house. Leah read the letter in silence, her fingers trembling along the creases. When she reached the final sentence, she stood and walked out onto the porch without a word. Dina followed her, arms wrapped around herself. Aria took the paper, reread it, then asked one question. "Where is Rhonda now?" That answer was harder. Rhonda Keller had disappeared from town records just months after the boys went missing. Her lease was terminated in July 2007. Her mail was forwarded for a while to a P.O. box in Connecticut, then stopped altogether. No credit card activity, no driver's license renewal, no social media. A ghost. Leah demanded a search. Mendoza called in favors, contacted state archives, ran her name through 6 different databases. Nothing. "It's like she erased herself," he said. "No employer since 2008, no tax filings. If she changed her name, she did it well." Leah stared at the ceiling that night, imagining Rhonda's hand on Ezra's wrist, her voice calling Noah's name. She tried to picture the route from the library to the lake, the small steps, the quiet urgency. Why would a school aide take 2 boys out alone? Why use the maintenance door? The image stuck in her head was Sylvia, alone in that library, watching it all happen and deciding to do nothing. She didn't feel anger. She felt despair. Because if Sylvia had spoken up, even whispered something to a teacher, maybe Ezra would still be alive. Maybe Noam would be home. The town, of course, had moved on. Rhonda's name had faded from casual mention. Most assumed she had been questioned and cleared long ago. But Leah knew better now. Rhonda hadn't been questioned. She had been ignored, hidden. Sylvia's letter reopened a case closed not by fact but by fear. Mendoza tried filing an official request to reopen the investigation. It was denied. Sufficient new evidence, the report stated. No forensic link between subject, Keller, and location or event, so Leah and Ari decided to do it themselves. They hired a private investigator, an ex-state marshal named Bonnie Reese, who specialized in missing persons. Reese traced the P.O. box in Connecticut to a UPS store near Bridgeport. It had been opened with a fake name, R. Kellerman, and closed after 90 days. Surveillance footage from that period had been erased, no usable leads. But Reese dug further. She found an old landline number Rhonda had once used to call in sick, traced to a mobile, now deactivated, but once pinged near a rest stop off I-95 in New Jersey in late July 2007. It was a whisper of a trail, but enough. She stared at the dot on the map. She ran, she said. She ran before anyone could ask her why. Ariel pulled out the only photo they had of Rhonda, taken in 2005, at a school trip, standing in the background near the bus. Grainy, blurry, but her expression was unmistakable. Flat, distant, like someone's people like that end up in care facilities, she said. Sure, different names. Traumas leave trails. Leah nodded. Find her, please. That night, Leah sat alone in Ezra's room with Sylvia's letter on her lap. The apology meant little now, but the image, the moment of truth withheld, etched itself into her bones. She pictured Sylvia, frail and dying, finally writing down what she should have said out loud years earlier, and she wondered, what else had others seen and buried? 3 weeks after Sylvia's letter came to light, Bonnie Reese pursued one last lead. Using an aerial LiDAR scan commissioned through a university program focused on documenting abandoned structures, she identified a slight elevation anomaly about 600 meters northeast of Birch Hollow Pond, obscured under thick canopy. It was the kind of terrain no one casually wandered into, dense, overgrown, off-trail. Armed with GPS coordinates and accompanied by Mendoza and 2 volunteers from the Ashbridge Fire Department, Reese cut through branches and underbrush until the outline of a structure emerged. The cabin was no more than a skeleton, 4 crumbling walls, a collapsed roof, the scent of rotten pine lingering thick in the air. But it stood. Faint footprints, decades old, circled its base like ghosts. The door hung crooked on a rusted hinge. Inside, dust coated every surface. The air was still. On the far wall, above a broken chair, something stood out. A child's handwriting, crooked and faint, scrawled in white chalk. "Mom, he's cold." The room froze. Mendoza stepped closer. The earth parted, the chalk trailed off at the stroke uneven, fading. Near the baseboard, claw marks marred the wooden door, shallow but persistent. 4, then 3, then 1. Bonnie lifted a loose floorboard. Beneath it, nestled in dry earth, lay a small leather-bound notebook. The pages, yellowed and curled, held no name on the cover. But inside, the truth waited. The first entries mirrored the ones found in the backpack's notebook. Familiar phrases, brief descriptions of hunger, cold, the fear of night. But these were longer, thoughtful. A child trying to make sense of chaos. One entry read, "Ezra keeps sleeping. He doesn't eat. I gave him all the juice. I told him it's okay to cry, but he doesn't cry." Or another, "I saw her face through the slats. Not Mom. The other one. She gave us crackers once. But didn't talk. I think she's scared too." Then on the final page, in slanted, fading pencil, a single entry, dated roughly 3 days after the boys vanished. Day 3. Ezra didn't open his eyes. "I think it's my fault. I should have stayed awake. I should have made him move." "I'm sorry," Noah turned in that crumbling hut, the notebook cradled in gloved hands. Her knees buckled. Ari caught her before she hit the ground. Mendoza stepped back, his voice tight. "It wasn't just the boat. They were here, before or after, or maybe both. The evidence was cataloged, preserved, passed through official hands. The FBI reopened the case under new directives. Rhonda Keller was now a person of interest in an active federal investigation. But no trace of her emerged, no digital footprint, no bank activity, nothing. A ghost. Meanwhile, forensic teams returned to the cabin. Soil samples revealed trace human proteins, residue consistent with decomposition, but no full remains. Ezra, they concluded, likely died there before being moved. By whom, no one knew. As for Noam, no biological trace of him was ever found. Just his words, his drawings, his final apology. Leah took the notebook home. It sat beside Ezra's kippah and the chalk they'd recovered in a sealed evidence bag. In the margins of the final page, Noam had drawn a tiny star. Life-sided, unfinished, the same way he always drew them on birthday cards. The town of Ashbridge held one final vigil. This time, it was silent. No speeches, no music, just candles and chalk handed out to children who drew stars along the sidewalk outside Beth Elm Elementary. Leah stood with her hand on Dina's shoulder. Ari stared into the pond. Bonnie Reith filed her final report. The truth, she wrote, was never lost. It was hidden, piece by piece, by fear, by silence, by time. But the boy never forgot. He told us even if we were too late to hear. In the weeks that followed, the cabin was sealed and designated a crime scene. The boat was taken into federal custody. The lake was closed indefinitely. Leah placed Noam's notebook in a glass case beside Ezra's last school photo. She kept it near her bed. Sometimes, late at night, she would reread that final page. Not for pain, but for proof. That he had been there. That he had tried. That love, even in terror, still found a way to speak. Because even though the forest had taken her sons, even though the lake had swallowed truth and time, one small hand had reached for chalk, scratched out a message, and left behind a voice no silence could bury. Appreciate the story? Hit subscribe to follow more true story mysteries like this one. A like helps others discover what really happened. What moment stayed with you, and where in the world are you watching from? Share it below.